Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. This is our last panel of the day, and last but not least, we saved it for last because it's very special. It's what we call a law enforcement spotlight, and this time with the FBI, who's probably the most active agency in any incident response that any of you will be working on. I'll briefly tell you about our two speakers, starting off with Bryan Smith. He's a special agent and section chief of the cyber criminal section, where he supervises a cyber squad focused on criminal cyber intrusions. Prior to his present assignment, Bryan was the unit chief of the FBI's financial institution fraud unit, overseeing the national asset forfeiture, bank fraud, identity theft, intellectual property rights, money laundering, mortgage fraud. In 2013, he served in the cyber division, where he initiated a cyber financial team. But what you might not see from Bryan's bio is he was one of the first FBI agents in history to be detailed to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, where he assisted on all sorts of things: insider trading, market manipulation, investment fraud. So he really has a very, very unique perspective on both financial crimes and traditional crimes. And you really, I think there's a very small handful of people that have done that, agents that have done that detail. Prior to the FBI, Bryan worked as a consultant for Andersen Consulting, now Accenture, and Deloitte & Touche. And he also comes from an FBI family. His grandfather, his uncle, his brother, they're all FBI agents. So this is a true public servant you are listening to today. His picture should be next to the definition of public service in the dictionary. And we couldn't be more happy to have Bryan here. Thank you for your service, Bryan, and welcome.
Thank you.
And the last person of the day that we are going to talk about is, let me say this: if there were a Mount Rushmore of IR investigators, on it would certainly be Ed Strauss, Eric Friedberg of Strauss Friedberg, Kevin Mandia of Mandiant, Brett Padres of Crypsis, now Unit 42, Dave Fontaine of Altegrity, and this next panelist, who's really a sort of incident response composite of George Lucas, John Wick, and Vin Diesel. And he is Jason Smolanoff, Senior Managing Director and Global Cyber Risk Practice Leader at Kroll, who can play the role of actor, director, and producer of any incident response engagement, from forensic review to managing a global IR remediation or briefing the board, which I've done with Jason, and he's fantastic with boards of directors. He now supervises 600 professionals in 20 different countries. And what you might miss from Jason's bio is all of that is he's not just his FBI experience, where he led a broad range of cyber investigations and also served in Afghanistan in the FBI's Major Crimes Task Force in Kabul doing global intel work. But also Jason is a rocket scientist, and that's not me being metaphorical. He's a rocket scientist. He actually has earned 2 patents for real, and he's got a master's in chemical physics. So welcome, my good friend, Jason, and congratulations on all you and your firm has achieved thus far. And I look forward to this, the final panel presentation of the day.
John, thank you so much. I rarely blush, but you make me blush almost every time that happens. So thank you very much. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been really excited about this panel. And really, I know most of the folks listening are going to be excited to hear the FBI's viewpoints on a variety of topics that I think we'll touch. But I thought maybe we could start with sort of the current threat landscape, which, really, I think what's on everybody's mind is the conflict in the Ukraine really has been one of the biggest influences in how cyber, or the shifting dynamics within cyber, where state-sponsored groups have publicly taken sides for either Russia or the Ukraine, which I found to be absolutely fascinating. And when we're seeing this, we're seeing different kinds of attacks. We're seeing new malware and cyber criminals really splintering down political lines. What's the FBI seeing, and what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, certainly, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be with this group today. One thing you'll probably hear in my conversation with you is the importance of the private sector, and that starts with engagements just like this, so that you can understand, what we're seeing, what we're thinking, and then provides maybe a platform mechanism by which we can have future engagement going forward. It's funny, when you ask that question, I think back to just, maybe I can't remember the time frame of it, of maybe a month ago, and I was doing another outreach event, and someone asked a very similar question as to what we're seeing right now. And it was just after, I think it was a day or two after Conti leaks happened. And, they said, well, what's the threat landscape look like? And I said, you want to know right now? Do you want to know 48 hours ago? You want to know 3 weeks ago? Because the answer is different. And I think that holds true even right now, is that this is an evolving landscape. And it's been evolving over the last 5 years. But certainly over the last 3 to 4 months, it has changed dramatically for a whole host of reasons. Certainly the invasion of Ukraine is part of that. And so, like you said, that activity that you have seen, we've all seen this, some of these groups taking an ideological stand with different nation states on it. And with that, it provides some interesting ways to look at things and to understand a motivation of actors, which is something that we want to do at the FBI because we want to understand what they're trying to do. And that goes to one of the things I think is really important within looking at cyber, is that we can't just focus on the technical aspect of it. That is a huge component of this, but you also have to understand the functional piece of it, which is really the intent. Why is the adversary engaged in this activity? And whether that's a nation state, whether that's a criminal group, whether that located in Eastern Europe who's engaged in ransomware, whether that's a criminal group engaged in BEC, you need to understand their motivation. And so when somebody breaks into a network, you got to understand what they're trying to do with that information, whether it's the data they're exfiltrating or whether it's financially motivated. And so understanding that with these actors, that provides some unique opportunities for us. There's an old adage that you win races in the turns. And when things change, that's when you can take advantage of it. But it doesn't change what they're doing. It doesn't change the vectors of the attack, how they're getting into people's networks. It may change the motivation a little bit, but still the largest component, at least of what I'm concerned about, because I oversee our criminal operations, so these are non-nation state actors, is they are financially motivated. And we have to keep that in mind, because if they can't make money off it, then they're not going to do it and they're going to find something else. And so our job and the job of the private sector is, how do we make those barriers higher and stronger to make it more difficult for them to do that?
So that's super fascinating, right? Because I think, for most people outside of government, they're not really taking the time to understand what is the behavioral profile, what is the motivation of that attacker. They're seeing the outcome of it, right? They're being attacked. They're dealing with trying to contain that attack or deny the attacker from their network. So they're really tied up in that. So with that said, there are a bunch of sanctions, as everyone knows, that are being applied towards Russia to try to really impact the Russian economy, to help slow down the war. Does the FBI believe or have a position that whether there'll be an uptick in cyber attacks once sanctions do start taking hold, if they take hold? Is there a position, or do you have any opinion on that?
Yes, it certainly is an interesting question. I guess, the way I look at this is that, I feel like we have been in an elevated state probably for the last 6-7 years. And I think there's a different level we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years, particularly in relation to ransomware. And so if you think back within any of us who've been in the space in that time period, there have been what we've all saw as we thought were seminal moments within cyberspace, and then things went back to where they used to be. And then there was another moment and things like that. And so we've seen blips on the radar where there's an increased activity. I would say that, certainly, we are seeing some of that right now. Whether it's sanctions related or not, that's hard to say on this, because I really see it as a pretty much a steady increasing rate of this activity over a longer period of time. And I think when we look, if we go forward in the future and we kind of look back to here, we may see some bumps in the road, but I think we will continue to see that increased state of it. And when I say the increased state, that's increased state of activity, the increased state of the impact and the increased state of the losses. And that our hope is that we can limit the losses and the impact, but I don't see the activity decreasing because it's too lucrative for them to give up on the activity.
No, that's sort of what we're seeing too with our clients in the private sector as well. And in fact, we recently did a survey of CFOs out in the private sector, and about 65% said that the top cause of significant cyber incidents impacting their business was ransomware and business email compromises. Is that similar? Is that a similar trend to what the FBI is seeing? I'm always curious about how what the public and private sector and how they jive.
Yeah, no, that unfortunately that is consistent with what we're seeing within this. And we have spent a lot of time getting out and providing guidance and advice to the private sector of things that they should do. And one of the things that, if you've listened to us talk about this, that we've really focused on is that there's a technical aspect to BEC cases. Sometimes there's intrusion, sometimes there's not an intrusion, but there is some sort of technical aspect to it. But the way you solve it is not just necessarily a technological solution. And that very often the best practices are actually business processes that you can insert within your company to address it. And so while we've seen that kind of increase, we continue to see an increase. I think last year, if you look at the latest IC3 report, I think it was somewhere almost 20,000 complaints, maybe 19,000, and 2.4 billion in attempted losses. It's a staggering number. The one thing I would say on the BEC is that, one, you got to look at this holistically. It's not just a technical problem, it's a functional problem, and we need to start putting business processes in it. And I don't know if that's because I'm influenced from my old consulting days. You have to look at the people, the technology, the processes, and the fact that I can't walk by a whiteboard without writing on it. But I really feel that that's important to address this type of activity. The other thing I'll say with that is that it's really important, with the reporting, is we actually have some good news in that. And if you look at the latest IC3 report, the amount of money that we've been able to work with our partners at financial institutions and freeze is a staggering number. It's at $328 million last year. And that's really key to this, is that the only way that we can help with that, and the only way the financial institution can help, is if you call us. And you have to call us right away. And I'm talking minutes matter more than hours, and hours matter more than days. If you don't call us, we can't help with any of those. And so BEC will continue to be a problem, but my hope is people can put some process in place to make it harder on the adversary, and they will adjust their tactics, and we have to do the same.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of the things we constantly tell people. This is not a technology problem. It's a governance problem. You should have strong governance in place that drives operations, that drives technical controls to alert you to when something's going on. So with that said, to call the FBI right away, like when someone does call the FBI, like what can you guys do? Because I know sometimes people call the FBI, at least when I was there, they wanted to get a free investigation and they wanted you guys to come in and remediate their systems and help get them back online. I'm pretty sure that's not going on yet because it wasn't when I was there, but I just wanted to see if you could help set expectations for people who are listening right now.
Yeah, the FBI is a big organization, and it's a fantastic organization. There's incredible people there, but we can't be everywhere at the same time. Now, I say that, but we also have the advantage of we have people in 56 field offices across the country with sub offices that we call resident agencies in there. And so we're able to actually put an agent on a doorstep anywhere in the country within 2 hours. And there is nobody else out there who can do that. Now, is that agent going to be able to go and get into your network and remediate the thing for you? No, that's not their expertise. And, that's probably not what you want them to be. What you want us to do is to go after, to identify who these actors are, and then bring them to justice. And you do that by providing on a really timely basis and report to us early on of the indicators of compromise. Let us know, how they got into your network, what the extent of the exposure is. Some of the things that we're not looking for is we don't need to know everything that was taken within your network. That we don't want the photos that people have taken off people's hard drives. We don't want every single email. But what we will ask you, which goes to the earlier comment about the functional side of it, is that if you can look through that data and identify, hey, this went out the door, and this is what they could utilize to their advantage. That's interesting to us because then we start understanding the motivation. So again, bringing in the technical aspect as well as the functional aspect, both for you as well as then for our investigative abilities. When we come to the door, and let's say it's Revel ransomware and you're in Kansas City, that agent's going to show up at the door. They may not own that case on Revel, but they're going to provide you with everything that you need. So that case is actually handled by another office, but that office, that's all that they work. And so those agents are subject matter experts in that. And you, as in that local office, have access to that world-class expertise through that agent that shows up on your door. And so he or she is going to give you the indicators of compromise that we've pulled together. If it's not ransomware and some other actor, we're going to tell you if we know of, hey, this is what they're interested in. So you may want to look in these areas of your network because you may not have noticed that before. And in a ransomware situation, if there is a decryptor that's out there, we're going to provide you're going to have that knowledge of, yes, there is one, here's how you access it. And so you get that world-class expertise, but you get it from the local level. We are not going to show up at your door with the blue coats and the yellow letters on the back. We will be discreet on this. If you want us to come after hours and talk to your folks, if you just want to do it on the phone, that's fine. We recognize this is a traumatic event for you, and we are there to help and assist throughout the process.
That's super helpful, and I'm a big proponent of using and working with law enforcement. I do know that law enforcement has been quite good recently in also sharing, not just collecting evidence, but also providing indicators of compromise or relevant information back. Is that something that people listening might expect if there's information that you guys can share?
Certainly, yes. And so when there's an incident, if we have that type of information available, we're going to try and provide that to you right then at the doorstep. But so one, we can't give that to you if you don't call us. So we can't help you with that. And it's certainly, we've seen some instances where we've had some real success in ransomware. And that's been based up very quickly, victims providing us with wallet IDs, indicators of compromise, which then we've been able to take back and gain attribution to, and then in some instances go back and seize the money and return it back to the victims. But that's still too late. So the other thing that we've been doing over the last couple of years, and have really increased the velocity of this within the last probably 2 years, is pushing out proactively this information to the private sector. And so while it may be too late for you as company A that got hit with this, we're going to take that information, we're going to scrub it. It's not going to indicate who you are in this, but we're going to get that out to other people so that they can learn and they can better protect their networks. Because what we've learned within cyber is that it takes technical and functional skill sets, but it also takes a team approach to this. And that's a team approach between the private sector and the government.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are people or companies who, or let me ask you this. Do you find that sometimes when you do show up on the door, that there might be some hesitancy to share information because of privilege concerns or things like that? Is there anything any sort of assurances that you can provide a company about the information they're sharing with you and how it will be used?
Yeah, that is something that we battle quite a bit. And these are legitimate concerns that people have. And so what we prefer to have happen is that's a much better conversation to have when you're not in the fog of war. It's a much better conversation to have when you don't have a $10 million extortion threat hanging over you, and you're trying to figure out, how do I make sure that my business is going to be a going concern next week? You don't want to be making those decisions. So what we ask folks to do, and what we've asked our field offices to do, is to engage with the private sector outside of those windows, so that we can have those conversations with your general counsel. We can have the conversations with the folks in the IT department, so they can have a level of comfort when they're talking to us. Have that conversation with the president of the company, with our leadership, so they understand this is what it's going to look like. And also that instead of calling just a generic phone number at the FBI, which if you call a generic phone number, you will get to an agent who knows what they to do, that you're calling Bryan Smith or any of my counterparts across the country, because you have that personal relationship with them and you've talked through these things before, and now there's muscle memory behind it. And we've worked out those details, and you understand what to expect. We've explained what we're going to need from you, and there's a trust factor that goes into there.
Yeah, there's a question that just popped up in the chat, and I think it might be relevant now. Do you have any thoughts on how folks can use InfraGard or other public-private partnerships to kind of get in touch with the FBI? Because that sounds like what you were saying, and I think it might be good to maybe direct some folks on how can they build that muscle memory in advance before the hair on fire moment, which you can see I've had a few of those, right? So,
so InfraGard is a great avenue to open those doors, because there's always going to be an FBI agent who's engaged with that group. And then if you don't have an InfraGard chapter, or you're not a member of InfraGard, there's also other mechanisms. You can just reach out to that field office and ask to speak with the cyber supervisor, and just let them know that your local business, you understand that there's concerns within the FBI and the government about cyber activity, and you want to get a little smarter in that arena. And it was suggested that you reach out to your local FBI contact. They will take that call and they will call you back, because that's the kind of behavior that we want from the private sector. Because it doesn't help us when your hair's on fire. Very often people are saying, well, hold on, let me get through this moment. But then it may be too late for us to get the actual information, like the wallet ID, that we actually might be able to help you with.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. I always advocate, and we help our clients build those relationships up front, because I think that's part of good incident response planning and preparedness, to have all of your contacts in place, not just with the FBI, but with legal law firms, insurance carriers, incident response specialists, folks like that. And so I think that's just another component of a really solid incident response preparedness program. So, it's kind of crazy how fast these things go, Bryan, but we only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask you, what's the one thing that people should be paying attention to right now if they want to really build resilience or minimize risk for their organization, given the current climate with the Ukraine event, the Ukraine conflict that's going on, and other cyber criminal activities that are happening out there?
Yeah. So I'm as any agent, I take an open-ended question and I go where I want with it. So if you don't mind, there's actually going to be three things I want to say. One of them is that, and this goes back to something I talked about, functional skill sets. So we're very good at the Bureau, but we can't do this by ourselves. And so you have probably seen there's been a lot of activity over the last 6-7 months in this space by the US government. And that's, a lot of our work within that, but we can't do it alone. And so we're very appreciative partners. And I think that's a really good example for folks to understand that it takes complementary skill sets and takes a lot of different tools. It's not just arrests. It's not just indictments. It's not just seizures. It's also sanctions. It's also infrastructure takedowns. And that it's critical that we have private sector engagement in that, both to understand the threat as well as then to address it. As far as things that people can do, and the other thing is I'd say, sitting here, I would be proud of your US government for the things that they're doing, because we're fighting back. on behalf of the American people, and we're making an impact on the adversary. For what people can do is, one, we got to report. We cannot help you, and the Secret Service cannot help you, and other law enforcement cannot help you if you don't call us. I can guarantee you will not be helped if you don't call us. So at least let's increase the odds by making that phone call and seeing what we can and can't do. The second part is that we need people to look at this internally to protect themselves as not an IT problem, but as a business problem. And that years ago, somehow we divorced ourselves from the idea that these systems we put in place, which were designed to create more efficiency and to develop better business practices and engage in faster commerce, became an IT problem and not a business problem to solve. And so the more that we can get those groups aligned together and people within organizations recognizing that that's my problem, not just the IT guy's problem, and I need to figure out what are the crown jewels within my department that I can't let out, and have those conversations with the IT folks so that they can better serve you and protect you. And I think that makes the entire ecosystem safer so that you have less need to then be calling folks like us at the FBI.
No, I think I couldn't agree more. And along those lines, I think we'll have time for maybe one more question. But then I'm going to take this from the chat here. Does the FBI have a checklist or a template of the basic information that the FBI would be asking for if somebody does call you with a ransomware event, with a BEC event? Is there some basic information that people should have ready to turn over?
Yeah, so one, it's going to be your indicators of compromise for the event. If you have the emails, because typically these are spear phishing emails that gain access into the system, we're going to want to know the wallet ID that's been provided to you to make the payment on these, as well as then any other data point that you have of anomalous activity on your network. And this includes pre-infection, because ransomware is typically the last thing that happens within that. And so you will typically see some other dropper, some other malware, some other banking Trojan that was on your network. And so some of the activity and things that you can glean from that, and the exfiltration of data and capturing of information and where that goes, it may not be related to ransomware, but it's related to the precursor activity. And that's just as valuable to us. So the more data points like that you can provide to us, we are really good at taking a whole lot of data and finding those little nuggets and making connections between them and putting something bigger together.
Yeah, I know the analytic capabilities of the Bureau are pretty phenomenal. So I think that that would be super helpful for folks. One final question. Have you seen clients who have suffered a BEC ultimately get extorted as well? Or are you seeing those BECs and ransomware events being sort of kept kind of separately?
When you say extorted, do you mean as far as a ransomware event or just some other?
Extorted on top of, so they suffer from a BEC, and then there might be some data that's stolen and they get extorted as well. Like if someone has a BEC, should they just stop there in their investigation, or should they keep looking for other incidents that could happen?
No, unfortunately, is once somebody gets hit with one of these things, they are more prone because the adversary recognizes that they can get in there. And so they have a level of confidence that if they keep trying, they will be able to get in a network. And they may not engage in the same conduct, but they will try any method they can to extract some financial benefit from you. So we certainly have seen instances where it starts with a BEC, and then they maybe they're able to stop the wire transfer or something like that. And then they come in, they say, well, we also took your data, and so you pay us for that, or we're going to release it out to the wild. Which, if you pay it, I mean, think of who you're paying. You're paying a bad guy.
Yeah.
Who you're trusting them that they're going to actually delete that from their system and never use it again. So, people need to be aware of who they're dealing with these things when they do it.
Absolutely. Bryan, thank you so very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And more importantly, we actually really appreciate what you're doing to keep the country safe. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you, Jason, and for a great job moderating. And thank you so much, Bryan. We really do appreciate the discussion and your insights. It's the only way to learn about this stuff sometimes is to hear from you all, and it's just so helpful. That's our last panel for the day. Before we get to the announcement of our incident response 40 list, let me just do a couple of quick thank yous. Thanks to John Stark, who's been our master of ceremonies here today. His legend grows as an introducer of people. The chat reflects that, I think, pretty clearly. But also just an invaluable partner in organizing today's event. And thanks especially to everyone at Kroll for being our lead sponsor, and as well as our other friends from CrowdStrike, FTI, John Reed Stark Consulting, Sard Verbinnen, Stone Turn, Stroud Freeberg, and Unit 42. And also, of course, our lead law firm sponsor, Oric, and the 22 world-class law firms that we showed and that you've been hearing from all day long, who are sponsors and supporters of the event. Thank you.